Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're going to recap this week in cannabis news from April 18th to the 25th. So before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And then of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. And then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with so that you can learn how the industry is evolving. Try to figure out some of the best companies that you can see becoming the Amazon or the Apple of cannabis in time, and then consider waiting to find a value that's worth getting in at and buying and holding for the long run. Because again, at these share prices that we've seen, it's definitely stabilized. So if you have cash and you want to learn where you can potentially park your money over the next few years for the long run, you've come to the right place. Now, we're going to recap some 420 cannabis holiday retail highlights as traffic was up 10% in 2021. So we'll start here. Cannabis retail traffic was up 9.5% and sales rebounded 8.4% year over year on 420, according to Cova Software, the largest cannabis point of sale company in North America. While major outages plagued several big POS systems, Cova reported its fourth straight year of perfect uptime, 100% in benchmark transaction speeds of 1.4 seconds. That's pretty fast. During peak hours on 420, Cova was processing 380 cannabis transactions per minute and handled over 180,000 transactions for the day across 1,200 plus dispensaries. Now, April 20th, the cannabis holiday, has historically marked the cannabis industry's biggest sales day of the year. However, when looking at the past 3 years, 420 fell on distinctively different climates. 2019, which was a normal non-COVID year in which dispensaries in Canada and legal US states fought hard to be open by 420, and there was a lot of novelty in going to the shop and legally being able to buy your own cannabis and to procure the maximum amount of inventory to meet the surge in demand, they were rewarded with the biggest cannabis sales day ever on 420. Now, obviously, cannabis sales bounced back despite the fact that we're in an ongoing pandemic and a lot of unemployment, large economic recession. Last year, COVID saw a last year saw a COVID shutdown of all retail businesses in March, followed by various reopenings of dispensaries by states or province in April, coming off being deemed essential. There were also restrictions on how cannabis stores could sell via online order and curbside pickup, delivery only, and or limited visitors. So 420 of 2020 last year proved to be a better than average day, but did not set any record sales. Then 420 of 2021 was nowhere near the return to normalcy, as some municipalities were locked down for non-essential travel, while others were open for business, but with 6-foot restrictions in place. Nevertheless, the industry did see a 8.4% increase in sales over 420 2020, despite several POS systems crashing amid a higher volume. This forced nearly 2,000 dispensaries to turn customers away for hours. That's unfortunate, and they mentioned 1,200 dispensaries, now 2,000 dispensaries, so not exactly sure how many they're actually servicing or who's having these issues. Nonetheless, Cova CEO Gary Cohen summarized 420 2021, saying preparations for 420 last year were tentative as our industry was just being recognized as essential. The supply of cannabis products was plentiful, but demand was the big question. It turned out there was a huge demand from consumers and patients, and because of COVID relief checks in April, they had money to spend in dispensaries. This year, the relief was not timed around 420 like last year kind of poetically was, but employment is higher and access to stores is easier, overall making 2021 a great 420. And based on COVID data, the daily lift in sales on 420 over average March daily sales has been 2019 up 240%, in 2020 up 78%, and in 2021 up 89% from the average March daily sales. So the average invoice per transaction in the US was 76.26 USD, an increase of 9% over 2020. For Canada, the average invoice was $52.48 Canadian, a decrease of 2% from the year earlier. Mind you, my province, Ontario, the most populated province, was again locked down, and although we could pay online and go collect it or get delivery, it obviously does reduce the experience of going in and being able to pick something novel to enjoy the holiday with. Dispensaries across North America saw 9.5% more traffic throughout their stores, which is attributable to this April's greater freedom to visit retailers in the US. In Canada, a surge in COVID cases, lag in vaccines, and more lockdowns by provinces created challenges for retailers. Despite that, Canadian cannabis stores processed 5% more transactions on 420. And 1,000 new stores got to celebrate their first 420. This is a good reminder. Year over year, approximately 1,000 new dispensaries opened, an increase of 20% in North America. Several geographies greatly expanded dispensary counts and access to cannabis in the past 12 months, namely Ontario, which is my home province in Canada, California, Oklahoma, and Missouri, a new medicinal state, cannabis state in 2021. The better climate this year and impact of these markets helped to significantly propel overall sales for the cannabis holiday. And with Ontario opening 120 stores a month by the end of 2021, we're going to have over 1,000 dispensaries in our most populated province, where we have 14 million people. So that is going to significantly help Canada's growth as they aim towards $4 billion in sales this year. Now, this is a cool map. This was a really cool visual I wanted to show you. Every 420 transaction captured by Headset.io yesterday. As we can see, the East Coast lights up first. A lot of West Coast shops still opening early to take advantage. Now, Florida has a huge party throughout. It might block when I make this big screen, but imagine when more of the country's filled in. You can't buy anything in Texas, New York. Most of the East Coast is also not available for adult use sales. So just imagine the potential as more states legalize. Once Florida legalizes for adult use and not just medical. So clearly, though, the country was having a party. Red states not benefiting from this, but everywhere else getting the tax revenue, employing their citizens with jobs. Less reasons for cops to arrest in these states that have reformed their laws in the right ways. So just great to see. And also, if we zoom in big, we can see Florida recede in this moment. Not sure if you've been able to see that, but like magic disappeared. But from 9 a.m., pretty strong. From 9 a.m. across to 5 p.m., sales seem to accumulate to over $50,000 or so per minute. So that's an amazing trend. Cool visual that I wanted to show you all. Now, on top of that, Planet 13 crushed a single-day record in Las Vegas with historic 420 return. A leading vertically integrated Nevada cannabis company announces record sales day on April 20th, 2021. The company generated $543,000 in a single day sales with gross margins during the month in excess of 50%. The demand and acceptance for cannabis is growing across the country, and nowhere is that more evident in Las Vegas. For tourists returning to Las Vegas, Planet 13 is synonymous with cannabis and an incredible entertainment experience, said Larry Scheffler, co-CEO of Planet 13. The demand is so overwhelming that even with the many improvements we have made to streamline throughput, we still can't capture all of the demand. I'm excited for the relaxing of COVID restrictions on May 1st and our expansion, which doubles our sales floor and points of sale to handle the unprecedented surge in customer traffic. So good thing on the floor we're seeing, or strong sales on the floor is what we're seeing out of these companies. Not every MSO did report these figures, but nonetheless coming from a few. Thank you MSOs for doing that so we can see exactly what happened. While Air celebrates their 420 holiday with retail sales records across its 6-state footprint, Nevada, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania all had record days. In total, the company saw 14,241 transactions and $1.24 million in sales yesterday for an average ticket of $87 US. Retail gross margins remained high at over 50%. In Nevada, where the local economy is seeing the benefits of reopening of casinos and entertainment venues, Air, through its service and operation agreement with licensed operators, saw over 7,500 transactions and over 2,000 in its busiest location alone. And Nevada made a good portion of its average daily count. And I could not be prouder of our Air Wellness team. This 420, we set a new standard for performance and customer service with over 14,200 transactions processed in one day. As cannabis continues to mainstream throughout their culture and 420 increasingly becoming a national holiday, we are thrilled to provide our consumers with an exceptional customer experience, excellent products, and new ways to safely celebrate the wellness and wonder of cannabis, said Jonathan Sandelman, CEO of Air Wellness. And on top of that, let's highlight Florida sales for the week. Now, this does not give us the number in sales, but it does tell us the amount of cannabis in milligrams and ounces sold. So this is from the Office of Medical Cannabis Use for April 20th, 2021. And this recaps the week of April 19th to the 23rd. Now, one thing I want to point out is qualified patients in Florida, 540,000 as of the end of this week, and qualified physicians, 2,553,000. So obviously, the more physicians, the faster and more patients that they can bring on. But I'm going to show you in a moment, comparing this, the rate of growth is pretty exceptional. Now, weekly highlights, a few more dispensaries opened up. We had AltMed, Harvest opened 2, Liberty Health Science opened 1 in Florida this week. But if we can see here, it tells us which MSOs have the most dispensing locations, and of those locations, the amount of milligrams in THC of medical cannabis sold, the amount of milligrams of CBD of low THC cannabis sold, and the amount in ounces of cannabis flower sold. Trulieve obviously leads the way, as they do have over 50% market share in the state, but it shows how much is actually being sold. Trulieve literally sold more than a ton of cannabis last week. That's incredible. 1 US ton is about 32,000 ounces, and they sold 36,596 ounces, literally a ton. So that's incredible. Now, this is the one thing I wanted to show you is if we just take a step back and check out last week. We just switched the 23 for 16. They only had 533,000 medical patients, 7,000 less just last week. And they had 2,446 doctors as opposed to 2,553, I believe. So 100 less qualified physicians. So think about this rate of growth over just a week. That's 7,000 more patients, 100 more physicians. Trulieve last week did open 2 more dispensaries, their 80th and 81st. And they didn't end up selling a ton last week, but seems like they end up getting there by the end of every single month. So we're just going to bounce back from the old last week's version to this one, just to show you all again. Like so this growth on the ground is huge. Now most states will end up releasing their sales figures towards the end of the month, so I'll have some more like Illinois sales figures and Michigan sales figures for you in the next few weeks. But considering that Trulieve is selling over a ton of cannabis a week or close to, that's very impressive. And knowing that sales on the ground are very strong is what we want to know as long-term investors, as again, the day-to-day share price and volatility doesn't matter. It's more of a gift, especially for those coming around with cash now. Now, on top of that, 91% of Americans support legalized cannabis as Democrats push for reform. Now, this was another interesting development. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said he expects to introduce legalization legislation to the Senate in a few weeks on Tuesday, a day that he called a very unofficial American holiday 420. On the same day, the House passed the Safe Banking Act, which offers protections for banks who do business with the cannabis industry in states where it's legal. Now, so he's gone from saying shortly to soon to near future to in a few weeks, according to this article. So it's nice to bring a little more optimism into the picture. Now, what could possibly stand in the way? Honestly, we don't know. It's just the uncertainty that's really, I think, confusing people. But obviously, the media does want to present what could be potential roadblocks. So I'll read this. President Joe Biden could also be a potential roadblock, even if a bill were to pass Congress. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said during a Tuesday press conference that Biden does support cannabis decriminalization and the legalization of medical cannabis, while refusing to answer a question about whether he would sign a bill for full legalization. So does this actually tell us that Biden would be against this? Not really. What it tells me is that his press secretary is trained at dodging questions, just like boxers are at punches, and she's basically reiterating his stance and what he ran on for his campaign, and just refused to answer the question because she doesn't have an answer, which is the way you want to deflect these questions. Mind you, obviously we want answers, and politics, though, is the professional game of not giving clear answers. The president supports leaving decisions regarding legalization for recreational use up to the states, Psaki said. So again, she's just reiterating what his stance was for legalization for his campaign. He supports decriminalizing cannabis use and automatically expunging any prior criminal records. Again, reiterating his campaign. He also supports legalizing medical cannabis. So I think for her, an easy thing for her to say is to emphasize legalizing medical cannabis, which isn't the same as what the House and Senate have proposed, but they have not yet passed a bill. So obviously the House has not yet passed a bill, but they keep saying introduce legalization legislation. So full-on legalization legislation is different from legalizing medical cannabis, which isn't the same as the House and Senate have proposed, but they have not yet passed a bill. So ultimately, this is going to create a little bit of worry and a little bit of pessimism in anyone reading it, thinking like, oh, well, could Biden stand in the way? But there's no clear answer from Biden. So just a reminder, try to not attribute too much meaning to news articles that are just reiterating what people have said when it really doesn't highlight any of the talks that Biden and Schumer might have had themselves. We just don't know. So better to remember that, we don't know. Congress is responsible for creating this legislation, not Biden. So we trust that, Schumer's gotten this far, and clearly he knows he's going to be a legend for being the one to reform cannabis laws. Let Schumer and his team do his work. And again, not to just distract yourself by fluff that if you take it to mean the wrong thing, you could end up making a bad financial decision because of it. Now, on top of that, though, let's just reiterate what Biden's campaign promises were: decriminalizing the use of cannabis and automatically expunging all prior cannabis convictions. So Biden believes no one should be in jail because of cannabis use. As president, he will decriminalize cannabis use and automatically expunge prior convictions, and he will support the legalization of cannabis for medical purposes, leave decisions regarding legalization for recreational use up to the states, and reschedule cannabis as a Schedule II drug so researchers can study its positive and negative impacts. Now, it's possible he has not agreed with Schumer, Wyden, and Booker on their desire to completely deschedule cannabis as opposed to rescheduling it, where apparently Biden does want it rescheduled into a Schedule 2. Now, if you're an American, you do not want cannabis rescheduled because then the government keeps control of it and it can never at any point be sold as freely as tobacco or alcohol at stores, which is what you want. If it's descheduled completely, then we can create that channel of commerce and allow it to go that way. If it's rescheduled into Schedule 2, there's going to be more problems. Now, the thing, though, I think that's positive is that Schumer and his team are aware of that, and they are planning to deschedule it, remove it completely from that classification that it should never have been in the first place. So keep an eye out for that, though, because you do not want it rescheduled. But again, that's we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Now, following that, Marijuana Moment reports don't expect Senate cannabis banking vote anytime soon, key chairman says. So let's read into this. A key Senate chairman is tempering expectations about a vote in his panel on a bill to protect banks that work with state legal cannabis businesses from being penalized by federal regulators. While the House approved the Secure and Fair Enforcement Safe Banking Act this week, along largely bipartisan lines, Senate Banking Committee Chairman Sherrod Brown said the proposal hasn't won his support just yet because I think we need to look at a number of things. Meanwhile, the bill's House sponsor Ed Perlmutter says he's open to changing the proposal in a way that's amendable to the chairman if that helps move it forward. Brown told Cleveland.com that he's been talking with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the issue and we'll see where it goes. Schumer told Cannabis Moment this week that he doesn't think it's wise for the Senate to pass cannabis banking legislation before tackling more comprehensive reform because the more modest proposal would likely attract Republican members and undermine efforts to get support for the broader legalization legislation he's working on. So to me, that sounds like what he's saying is don't put it for a standalone vote yet. Let's see how we can potentially mix it with this broader reform that he plans to introduce possibly in the next few weeks. Let's see how we can mix this together and get the support we need by putting everything together into one bill, which seemed like the plan over the last few months based on what they were insinuating. In any case, Brown isn't necessarily ruling out a vote on the Safe Banking Act, sponsored by Jeff Merkley and Steve Daines, but he says his panel has other priorities. This committee's been too much about Wall Street, not enough about housing, not enough about rural and urban affairs and people's everyday economic lives, and that's my focus, Brown said. I will look at this seriously, we're just not ready to move on it. The senator said in February that he's willing to advance cannabis banking reform, but with it needs to come sentencing reform, and that is the idea of putting it all together. That said, he didn't provide details in his latest comments about what particular reforms he'd want to include, saying, I'm not a lawyer, and I want to understand that part better and make sure we do it right. We'll probably get one good shot at this, and I want to do it right, he said. Perlmutter, meanwhile, says he's open to doing what it takes to get the bill approved this Congress, and he told KOA News Radio that while he's been overly optimistic in the past, he's confident the Safe Banking Act will pass this session. Now, just a reminder that this session means until the end of 2022, but there's a good chance, especially based on what Schumer said last week, saying that he wants cannabis, or 420 next year, to be a legalized, not official, but just a legal holiday where cannabis would no longer be illegal. There's a good chance that SAFE will pass long before the end of 2022. Asked about the prospect of adding criminal justice reform provisions to the legislation, as Brown said he wants, the congressman said that's all great. Make it a bigger bill, he said. Do whatever, just do something. And as it stands, the banking legislation has 33 co-sponsors plus Merkley, which means more than a third of the chamber is already formally signed on. Now again, just do something. That's all I want them to do. And as much as it's tough to trust politicians after all of the lies that they spew, just got to trust that in the right frame of mind, knowing the legendary status they will leave behind, that they are working to just do something finally. Now, this is an interesting article from a less reliable source, but wanted to throw this in there. Cannabis Analyst, Safe Act won't reach Senate vote, but compromise scenario likely. And so what is a compromise scenario? Cantor Fitzgerald analyst Pablo Zuanic doesn't see the bill reaching a Senate vote either, as leading Democrats there are pushing for broader reform and not for isolated federal level changes for the industry. Back in March, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer held a short conference with Senate Finance Chairman Ron Wyden and Senator Cory Booker, sharing their actions on drafting extensive reform legislation. Just last week, Schumer announced his plans to reintroduce a federal legalization bill soon. Once it's introduced, it will go to the floor, Schumer said. Now, so what is this compromise scenario? With the considerable limitations of a 2-year congressional term, President Biden's apparent lukewarm support, and the threat of the Republican filibuster, we are starting to see a compromise scenario is likely, Zuanic said on a Tuesday note. With so much noise around Democrats and cannabis legalization going on for a while, the Analyst doubts they'll end up doing anything substantial. Now again, this is just reiterating that headline thing to catch you and rile up your emotions, but instead thinks a narrower bill of bills is likely to get the final signature. Is that not something substantial? Like, it's just hilarious how the second part of the sentence completely contradicts the first. So, yeah, what's this potential substantial narrower bill of bills? Well, let's look into it. According to Zwanek, the limited bill would include federal level decriminalization, which is allegedly acceptable to the president as well, which is, well, that's what we want. Cannabis rescheduling from Class 1 under the Controlled Substances Act. Now, again, this is painful, and if I was an American, I would be very opposed to this. We want cannabis descheduling, but we'll see if this has to be done in a slower step-by-step process. Banking reform and enabling states to decide about their programs. If this bill passes in the above stated format, it would imply a positive change for multi-state operators, ultimately boosting their valuations. Does it imply more freedom for the American people in terms of the cannabis plant? It does a little bit, but unfortunately not what they'd like and not what we'd want if you would just deschedule cannabis completely. We think the banking reform provisions would propel the U.S. exchanges, New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, to list U.S. MSOs, and such a move would mean, in our opinion, that both the TSX and U.S. exchanges would have to be okay with large listed Canadian LPs buying U.S. MSOs, the analysts explained. Now again, as an analyst, I don't know why he would think that Canadians are just going to be able to jump in and buy MSOs when MSOs are a lot healthier than Canadians, fundamentally wise when you look at their numbers. But as an analyst that does work with banks, for him to say that we think that banking reform provisions would propel the U.S. exchanges to list the U.S. MSOs, that is a positive for investors in this article here. Now, if you want to email Chuck Schumer, if you're an American, I would recommend you do it. Select an option, share your opinion in comments on bills or other issues, and send him an email, because an email from one person, they take that as representative of like 5,000 or 10,000 people, because so few people actually take the time to write anything. So do that. You might just make a difference. Please, if you're American, I can't as a Canadian. Now on to legislative changes. Cannabis smoking lounges finally approved by Denver City Council as they are expanding their legal pot industry with cannabis smoking lounges. This is awesome. In honor of this very special 420 semi-post-pandemic holiday week, the City of Denver has an exciting announcement. On Monday, Denver City Council approved cannabis smoking lounges. This exciting news coincided perfectly with the cannabis holiday, getting city residents excited for what is to come. There are already some businesses in Denver that have been holding their breath, ready and excited to pivot as soon as local laws allow. The Tetra Lounge in Reno is just one example of a private club like many of the other clubs that already exist in Denver. Out-of-town owners, though, can't just stop in and get high, as membership is needed, and this has never been one of the major criticisms so far of the cannabis legal industry in Colorado and Denver, but there still isn't really a sustainable legal place for tourists to smoke. With this new ordinance passing in the city of Denver, it would now be fully legal to go in and enjoy a cannabis smoking lounge just as a guest stopping by. This is a smart move for rebuilding the economy and tourism in Colorado, as there will be many more options for visiting folks. I love it, said an unnamed individual at the Tetra Lounge about this new ruling. I think it's a beautiful thing. I'm very glad I do too, because again, this just helps accept the plant for what it really is and takes it out of that awful light that it's been painted in for so long. On top of that, Montana Senate passes bill legalizing recreational cannabis. Montana Senate Friday passed the bill to legalize recreational cannabis and direct taxes on the drug to support addiction treatment and conservation programs. Jesus, ads nonstop. The bill was passed out of the House earlier this month and was passed in the upper chamber by a 34 to 16 margin. It will go back to the House so it can approve the legislation by the Senate with the Senate's amendments. Should the bill be signed into law, recreational cannabis sales would be taxed at a rate of 20%. Yikes, that's hefty. Of the money raised, $6 million annually would go to drug addiction programs, and 20% would likely go to conservation efforts. Other funds would be directed to state parks, wildlife protection, veteran services, police training, and others. Tax revenue from the law is anticipated to be more than $48 million annually by 2025. Very small population, much smaller impact from taxes. But great to see Montana following up on what their voters voted for in November. Next, a bill to legalize cannabis filed in the Texas House. A bill filed by Representative James Tallarico would also expunge past cannabis records. This is huge, Texas! Yes! On April 20th or 420, as those who celebrate the holiday honoring cannabis use like to style it, Rep. James Tallarico discussed a bill aimed at legalizing cannabis. House Bill 4089, if signed into law, would legalize cannabis use, expunge past cannabis records, and use the new tax revenue to fund early childhood education. Yes, that is a victory for cannabis right there, and Texas. This is a popular bipartisan idea, Tallarico said on Twitter. According to the Texas Tribune's latest polling, 60% of Texans support the full legalization of cannabis. Only 13 said it should still be completely illegal. While opponents claiming cannabis is a gateway drug, Tallarico claims that those who use cannabis do not move on to harder drugs. Incredible! A politician that has read the new evidence for himself and can make up his own mind. We need more like this. In fact, medical research suggests alcohol and tobacco are far more dangerous to our health than cannabis. He said, Of course! We've known this for so long. Cannabis has health benefits and can be used to treat ailments like chronic pain, depression, and addiction. That's why human beings have been using cannabis for more than 3,000 years. An impressive politician. This shouldn't be so rare, but my goodness. Tallarico has also said he believes the legislation can help end the racist war on drugs he says has targeted black and brown Americans. It's so true. He's a smart man. This is incredible. And black Americans are 4 times more likely than white Americans to be arrested for cannabis possession, even though both groups consume cannabis at the same rate, he said. So, folks, this is the difference between a politician who cowers and sticks to their old beliefs and keeps getting donations from Big Pharma sliding right into their pockets as opposed to learning new information. So respect for James Tallarico here. Hopefully Texas will make a move on this soon. And then Louisiana lawmakers approve a bill for legal medical cannabis flower for patients. A bill to allow medical cannabis patients in Louisiana to access raw cannabis flower cleared a House committee on Thursday, 2 days after a full chamber approved complementary legalization on taxing those products if they were legalized. The House Health and Welfare Committee easily passed the cannabis bill on a 12-1 vote. It would amend the state's existing medical cannabis law to make it so physicians may recommend raw cannabis products intended for inhalation. Why wouldn't they be allowed to do that in the first place? It's a great idea. Dispensaries could sell up to 2.5 ounces of cannabis flower to each patient in a 14-day period. Patients under 21 would need to have a written order from a physician specifically recommending cannabis in raw or crude form for that person to access these products. So again, we are seeing great developments out of states that we would not have figured before. Texas, Louisiana, and on top of that, Mayor of Birmingham, Alabama, all of these red states, to pardon 15,000 cannabis convictions, the state Democratic Party calls for legalization. So the Mayor of Birmingham, Randall Woodfin, confirmed Tuesday that the blanket pardons for cannabis convictions going back more than 30 years will be issued, reported High Times. What's more, also on 420, the unofficial cannabis holiday, the Alabama Democratic Party asked from regulators to legalize both medical and adult use cannabis. While Yellowhammer State launched its Pardons for Progress, what a great name, Yellowhammer State, launched its Pardons for Progress programs 2 years ago, only 9 convictions have been cleared since then. Just like the war on drugs, that effort is a failure. The new plan would cover closed cases with convictions for misdemeanor cannabis possession charges between 1990 and 2020, automatically pardoning them, writes the outlet. According to estimates, some 15,000 pardons could be issued. Refunds for any fines or fees paid to the court won't be issued, though. Obviously, they're not giving money back, but here's why we're doing this. No one should be held up by a single past mistake, Woodfin stated. No one should be denied job opportunities or freedoms due to the missteps from the past. No longer will these residents be bound by their past. They deserve a chance to be part of our workforce, to provide for their families, and to achieve success on their own. That new life starts right here today with forgiveness and redemption, coming out of the words from the mayor in Alabama. You gotta love it. Amazing. So on top of that, MSOs are announcing their Q1 2021 earnings. Terra Ascend to host their first quarter 2021 investor conference call for its first quarter end March 31st, 2021. So this counts for sales from January, February, into March on Wednesday, May 19th, 2021. And then we have Columbia Care announcing their first quarter 2021 results on Monday, May 17th. So from my memory, if it holds me right, we've got Curaleaf on May 10th, Trulieve on May 13th, I think Green Thumb on May 12th. Then we have Columbia Care on May 17th so far, Terra Ascend on May 19th. And then we have Kronos Group holding 2021 Q1 conference call on May 7th. Mind you, they're a Canadian LP, so definitely just a different ballpark. But we do have these next earnings figures to look forward to. So for anyone thinking that, oh no, all the catalysts have been wasted, you're looking too much into the past and forgetting that the best part about the future is that good things can continue to grow, especially quarter over quarter as we see the growth and we see the narrative around cannabis change overall. Now, last few things to point out: U.S. cannabis producers are now favored by Wall Street analysts who've soured on Canadian companies. Volatility is a feature of the cannabis sector, and if you're new to it or if you joined in, you know very well volatility is real and it's a lot to deal with. You need a tough stomach in order to get through it. But where stock prices have pulled back, a new banking bill could give cannabis investors hope. Reiterating, though, that a lot of analysts have shifted their focus to MSOs. Now, as we can see, these are 3 ETFs that were American-based that gave exposure to the cannabis industry. CNBS was the first one. Then we have YOLO, the second one, and MSOS. So this one, I believe, is CNBS, YOLO in the green, and MSOS, the pure U.S. cannabis ETF, in the purple. Obviously, since February highs, we have seen a healthy pullback, though, based on the amount of growth we saw continuously since March 2020. That was the start of the bull run. We appear to be in a bit of a small cannabis bear market, but again, this healthy pullback is required for continued growth in the opposite direction. But for this reason, wanted to just scroll down and say analyst opinions. Despite being kept off U.S. exchanges, MSOs have plenty of coverage among analysts working for brokerage companies. In order to look beyond the big 4 MSOs, Dan Aarons, the portfolio manager of YOLO and MSOS, has applied a list of 6 of the current most significant ones. One of those, TPCO Holdings Corp. Graham F. is covered by only 2 analysts, so it isn't included in the following list, in which all of the companies are covered by at least 5 different analysts. And this is again highlighting most of the companies I've been talking about, the main MSOs. Here a summary of opinion among Wall Street analysts for MSOs. We've got the big names here. We've got their market cap, and we've got their forward price to sales ratio. Basically, their price divided by projected sales for the year of 2021. And again, as companies that trade on the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ in other industries typically have an average of a 20x price to sales, these companies are trading at a 7x, 5x, 6x, 10x, 3x price to sales with a high buy rating, and including their closing price as of last week, their expected target price over the next 12 months, and the potential upside that they're insinuating. So that is there for you to go through and pick through for yourself. And it also does highlight the Canadian producers. Mind you, again, this is just a factor of them being a lot more overvalued because they've been able to trade on U.S. major exchanges, meaning they do not have as much potential upside and therefore do have more potential downside if there are no catalysts that come from the Canadian side. So just wanted to highlight this. Obviously, you can find the link below. And lastly, this is another awesome resource I wanted to point out, the U.S. Cannabis Dispensary Count from MJstocktrader.com. He's also active on Twitter. He's a great resource that you can check out. I follow him. I recommend you do too. But this tells you all of the U.S. multi-state operators, and it has their total stores and the total number of states that they're in, and it breaks down in a clear visual way for you to see how many companies have active operations and where these active operations are if they're in states that have a large population in a fast-growing adult use market. So definitely worth checking out here. And obviously that he has the stock fundamentals, the investor portal, the earnings calendar as well. So lots of great information here if you want to grab it below. But that is it for this week's episode, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know in the comments what you think. Did last week kill your vibe, or is your vibe still going strong based on the fundamentals and everything solid that we see on the ground? Let me know. I'd love to have a discussion. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like on it. Subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos and so that you can best prepare yourself for when the eventual uptrend continues to go on. And I will see you on Wednesday for a next week's midweek update. Have a great day, everybody.